Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to show you guys how we can unwrap this pop can, how we can create textures for it using Photoshop, and then how we can bring those textures back into Maya and use Arnold to render our pop can. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my pop can. Just to explore it, we have three different meshes. So we have like the tab pin, the tab, and the can itself. The can does not have an interior. So depending on your model, you might need to detach the inside right from the outside so you can unwrap it. But this one doesn't have an inside shell. It's just the backside faces. Okay, so let's go ahead and unwrap it. Unwrapping a cylinder is relatively easy. So what we can do is we can go to our UV editor and bring that up. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually look at my reference to kind of show you guys how we can unwrap this. So some pop cans, a lot of the modern ones, the logo does go up on this bump, right? And you can see the metal kind of stops right there. So, and then here's the bottom, you can see kind of where the label stops. So we'll probably separate the top and the bottom right there. Let's see if we've got other things. So yeah, you can see it there too. So let's go ahead and do that. So it's always good to have reference as a guide. That can help you hide your UV seams. But yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. It's kind of tricky when I need both up, but we can work with it. So the nice thing about Maya is you can select in your UV space and your 3D space too. So that's kind of helpful. Right now it looks like I have symmetry on, so let's just turn that off. And go ahead and cut this up. So let's just say right here is where I want the label to stop at the top. So this one is already unwrapped as one. So if you don't see all this, sometimes if you delete the UVs or start without any UVs, you'd want to go to create and planar. And that's just how I got here. So now we can cut seams in. Okay, so it's easier to select on the model, so let's do that. So just double click to select that ring of edges. I'll go to cut and sew. Cut. And now, oops, if I double click in UV space, it doesn't work in 3D space, but UV space sees those seams. And since I cut all the way around, I now have two UV islands. So let's go ahead and do the bottom. I think I'll stop the label for the bottom, like, let's do it this one. So I'll hit cut. And now in UV space, if I go to face mode, double click, I have three islands. The last thing I want to do is cut a seam down the back. So let's just select this edge right here. So if I double click, it's going to go up into the tops, and we could clean that up after the fact, but what I like to do in this kind of case, if I don't want that seam to cut into my other UV islands, because you can see it goes over the seam, that white line, I can select it, that same edge, just find in my UV space and double click it, and you can see since I selected in UV space, it stops right there. So I'll hit cut, and if I go to unfold, we have this. So the downside to this is, yeah, we could use it, but it's not straight. And for a label, we might want that to be straight. So how can we straighten that out? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to unwrap it as a cylinder. And that actually works perfectly for us. it's using that cylindrical projection to unwrap, and now it's making this nice rectangle. So now what I can do is just check. I like to check the distortion, so I'll turn on my UV checker pattern, and yeah, that looks good. It's maintaining all squares. So let's go ahead and turn that off, this icon right here. And we could scale it down, but I'm going to pack everything at the end. So next, I need to unfold these. These ones, I'm just going to use a planar, or excuse me, a unfold. And it should work nicely, because these are just kind of circles at the top. And as far as texturing goes, I'm probably just going to project a metal kind of brush on there, brush metal texture. But if I was doing something hyper realistic, I would probably come in to make my life easier and think about how this ridge is going to distort some of that texture. Because obviously, if this is laying flat, and I can turn on the wireframes, or excuse me, the texture, you can see it's doing some weird stretching right on those sides, because I'm just looking at it from the top. And so this isn't hyper realistic, it's just a demonstration, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. But just in a project or production, you would be more cognizant of that. All right, so these are laid out. Before I kind of pack these, I have to remember, I want texture information on the tab in the pin as well. So right now, they're separate objects. So when I click between them, you can see it's jumping to different. They're not all showing up on the UVs. We can pack them all into one UV space, which I'll show later on, but for now, let's just go ahead, select the pin. Let's turn off the checker pattern, the UV checker. And I will planar this first. Well, that just made it bigger. But what I want to do is I basically just want to cut this in half. So it's a little bit tricky, because if I just cut it in half, so I'll hit cut, and I try to like double click to break the halves, it's not letting me. And that's because I have to remember this asset, it connects to the back side because it's got this hole here and it's got this hole here. So if my topology is nice, which it is, it should loop all the way around. And so I select those two kind of holes that connect the back and the front, or top and bottom, I guess. And I'll hit cut, and now that lets me do that. Then I can just unfold. This one I can unfold as well. And it looks off, so let's kind of clean this up. I think the first thing I want to try to do is hit optimize. And also, what you might want to do is, if your unfolds aren't showing up how you expect, is you can check make sure the unfold plugin got loaded, because sometimes Maya does drop it. So I will go to Windows, plugin, or settings, preferences, plugin manager. I'll just look for unfold. And so mine is loaded, auto loaded, so maybe my topology is just squirrely right there. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my top view. It looks like I accidentally moved those, so undo. And I will use camera base. I'll do the same for the bottom too. And then I'll try to unfold. I'll try to optimize. It's not too bad. So let's try to optimize this one. Now, the tricky part is it's going, oh, that one worked. Okay, let me try this one more time. Okay, it's not liking something. So let's do this. The main thing is, in this one it worked because it kind of stretched it out, so now I'm getting those squares, but this one I'm not. Since it's the bottom, since you're not going to see it, I'm not too concerned, but I do want to try to get it close to the top. So I am just going to manually kind of scale it and get it close. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. And then maybe I'll try one more time to optimize, see if it doesn't do anything. That's okay though. All right. So that's unwrapped. We don't want to forget about the tab pen. So let me just go to boom. This one, I think it's just a singular model. Oops, let me go back to perspective so I can rotate around it. So yeah, it looks like it's just that. So we should just be able to unfold that. So I'll hit unfold, boom. And now we have to organize and pack our UVs. So if I select all three of the models, go to object mode, select all three, and I'll just turn on the checker pattern to illustrate this. You can see how the checkers are different sizes. I'm not going to go too much into depth about like texel density, which is essentially the kind of texture resolution you're working with. But basically, for our purposes, you want to make sure that the texel density matches between these objects for our PopCan asset. And so right now, what's happening is because the tab is huge compared to the body of the can, the checkers are smaller. So we're getting a lot more resolution. That means we can get a lot more detail in there. Which is really, if we were going to break from the texel density, we would want more resolution in the body because that's going to be the prominent feature of the asset where you might want more resolution. But for our sake, we want to keep them consistent. In Maya, it's pretty easy. We can select all these and we can go to our transform, and at the bottom of that tab, we have texel density. So we don't need to know about these numbers for right now. But what we'll just do is set them so they're all the same. Okay. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll scroll down to arrange and layout, and then it packs it nicely in there for me. So now we can see those the texel density is pretty consistent between these assets. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn off this, and let's go ahead and just save. Always make sure we save iterations. So I'll call this one unwrapped. Just in case I goof something up. We are missing out some space, you know. That's not the end of the world. We could maybe, depending on how we're going to texture this, break this up, cut one more seam to try to utilize more of the space. But for this demonstration, I'm not too concerned about it. So now what I need to do is I need to get this. I need something as a reference so I know where I'm painting in Photoshop. So these days, we don't really use Photoshop for texturing. I always think it's a good thing to know how to do like touch-ups, to do very, very simple things that maybe you don't have access to, like Quixel Mixer or Substance Painter. But these days, those are pretty common. But I think it's good. A lot of those concepts in Photoshop, even some of the Photoshop blending techniques, they translate over nicely into Substance Painter, Quixel, Mixer. So I think it's good to know how to use Photoshop. I've used it on several projects for touching stuff up, and even when I had access to Substance Designer. So let's go ahead and kick out a PNG of our wireframe so we have a guide in Photoshop. So to do that, what we're going to do is go to, in our UV editor, we'll go to Image, UV Snapshot. I'll set it to my project directory, and I'll just call it, excuse me, PopCan UV temp for template, and I'll hit save. And so that's where it's going to save its name. We want this to be 124 by 124, unless you're doing like a super close-up product render, you might do like 248. And so the main thing is you want to make sure when you do this method, you're doing it in powers of 2. So that's going to be like your 512, your 1024, your 248, right? It's just best practices for textures to be in powers of 2s. I think that's all we need to do. I think if you can play with the edge color, that's fine. I can tweak that in Photoshop as well. But that should be the only things we need to do. So I'm going to hit apply and close, and I get an error because you can see there's an error. Selected polygon subdivision surface or NURBS with UVs. So let me make sure I'm actually selecting the object. I'll hit 1. Make sure I'm not in smooth preview, and I'll hit apply. And let me check my directory. And I got it. Okay, so here it is. Now it did not kick out I didn't set the format, so that's the other thing I forgot to do. So let me set this to PNG, and now I'll kick that out. There we go. So we'll delete this one. I don't know what format that was. And so now we have our wireframe. So now I have a guide. So that's how we unwrap it and kick out the UV template. Now in Photoshop, what I'm going to do is bring over the UV template. And this is what I got. Let's go ahead and name our layer. So I'll call this one UV_temp. I'll keep this one on top. I'll lock it. So what you want to make sure you do is, yes, we want this in Photoshop, but when you go to kick this out, you want to make sure you hide it at the end. And I'll reiterate that again. All right, so let's kind of look at our raw assets. We're not going to do anything too fancy. I got a mix of like PNGs, JPEGs that I'll have to kind of edit. But we're going to make a pretty simple Nuka-Cola themed pop can. So the first thing I'm going to do is probably the label. And this is where like the downside of Photoshop is, because we'd have to either set up Photoshop to be able to look at our 3D models or port over our models into Maya to see changes like on our 3D asset. So we're kind of just playing it by ear in this view with our texturing, which is what we had to do way back in the day, and not so much anymore. So let me just drag this Nuka-Cola label in. And if you can kind of get an idea if you turn on nope, never mind. Those are not connected like I thought, obviously. I don't know if that scale of these checker patterns the same as Maya's, so we can't use that. But what I'm going to do is maybe scale this down. I know I put the seam in the back, so somewhere around here is going to be the front. And what we can do is we could just save this out really quick. File, save as, we'll place that. And I'll just put in my root because this is just going to be a test. So I'll call this texture test. And in Maya, I want to preview, like, see kind of where stuff's going to line up. So I'm going to open the hypershade. So if you click this icon right here, it brings up the hypershade. This is the material I believe I have assigned to my object, this blend. So I just right click and added it to the graph network so I can work with it. And then I should be able to in my directory grab this test and do color out into color. And if I hit this icon right here in Maya, I can see it. So this is good for kind of gauging what your logo is going to be at. I don't see any distortion, so that lets me know we laid out our UVs nicely. But I kind of know how much room I have to work with. All right, so that's quickly how we can like preview our thing on. And so because this is reading from the PDF file, if we save it, it should update in Maya. I think we might have to refresh something. So let's go to Photoshop and let's just play with this. So now I want to kind of art direct it. Keep in mind where these get dense, it starts looping over. So if I'm doing a vertical logo, I might want it to kind of stop right there. And I'll commit to that. So the next thing I want to do is just be organized. So this is already called logo 1. I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this one label. And in this folder, I'll call this, actually, I'll just keep this as is. Let's do an adjustment layer. Let's do hue saturation. And just so you guys can see what I'm doing easier in case you have not ever used clipping masks, I'll make a new layer underneath, just blue, so it's like easier to see. I'll call this one a dummy layer. Something. And so here's my clipping mask. So what I can do is I can change the hue, right? But it's changing the background, which is on a different layer. So what I can do is I have this hue saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to hold Alt, kind of hover between that adjustment layer and the layer that I want it to affect, and click. And that creates a clipping mask. So now when I edit this hue saturation adjustment, it's only affecting this layer that it's clipped to. All right, so basically I just did all this to basically change it from red to white. And I do want to capture this red though, because I think it's a solid red for the background. Okay. So I can put this in a group. I can call this one name or label name or something. Make sure it's in this label layer. And I'll keep that blue on there, and I'll move our UV template to the top. So in this label, I'll create a new layer. I'll call this one label background. And I will fill it, use the paint bucket tool. If you can't see paint bucket, it's gradient by default, and then you just click hold and paint bucket. So I'll fill that. I actually don't want it to go. I should have honestly given myself more space in Maya, because you see how close these are. So I'm actually going to do that before I get too deep into here. You want to give yourself some padding space. So really quick fix, I'll select all this, and I'm just going to go to UV island selection. That's this icon right here. Hold shift and select these ones and just move them up. Oops. Oh, that's my texture in the background. I was like, what is going on? So let me turn that off, because I had wireframe on when I exported it. We're just giving ourselves some wiggle room. That's all we're doing. Okay. Select everything. Then I'll do UV image, UV snapshot, apply, just overwrite it, and then I'll bring it back into Photoshop. So we'll delete this one. Let's and in our directory, just redrag that in. Cool. All right. That's way nicer. Just trust me, it was worth making that adjustment. So you have some wiggle room on the padding. So in that label background, I still have my red color. What I could do is I could do a marquee selection, and I will spill it out above that line just a little bit, because if you were to stop it like right at this line, you might see some of that background color when you go to back into Maya. So it's always good to just spill the color over a bit. But yeah. All right, so let's do Control D to deselect. And now, since I kind of have like where this is, I can hide my UV template for now and start playing with some of my other assets. So let's bring in like our label. Let's bring in the barcode. Oops. That asset doesn't look like it's going to let me bring it in. Let's go ahead and bring in... Oh, what? No, the brush metal's not coming over. Hold on. Oh, it's because I didn't commit to the transform, or the bringing it in. All right, so now we can bring in the barcode, commit. That brush metal that we'll use, we'll commit, and a couple of these fun logos. Okay. You can hide these and pull them up as we need them. And the first thing, we'll get this label in, so I'll bring this over. And I'll put it in the label tab. I'll put it under the name. And what we can do is just position this. So if I hit Control T, we can move it and hold Shift and grab a corner, and we can play with the label. So I think we'll do it like right here. Control T, maybe scale it up a little bit more. And I will grab the barcode, bring that over. What we could do is, if you just want the kind of black, we can use our magic wand tool. And then we can create a mask. So I selected the white, using the magic wand. I'm just going to hit this icon right here to mask it. And I'll select the mask on our barcode layer and hit Control I to invert it. And so you can see we have some leftover because the magic wand wasn't able to get it. So I'm just with the magic wand holding Shift and clicking those white leftover ones. And all we need to do is we're in the mask. So all we need to do is get a paintbrush and make the color black. And again, we're in the mask, so I can just mask that out. And then Control D to deselect. Now, sometimes you can feather the layer mask to get rid of the white outline. This is pretty thin, so it's going to be tricky. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our clipping mask again to just kind of flood those white pixels black. So I'll create a new layer. Excuse me. I'll create a new adjustment layer. Hold Alt, click between those two, and I will set it to black. And so now we got something that's pretty clean. And we can put these in a group. I'll call this one barcode. Control T. Boom. And let's get Vault Boy. I think I want the other logo because I think that's Nuka-Cola, but we can say Vault Tech approved it or something. I don't know. The lore. Just kind of wanted to throw some cool stuff on here. Oh, you know what would be cool? If Vault Boy's here. And let's bring this layer down. And the barcode will maybe do a vertical barcode with Vault Boy next to it. So yeah, again, this is where you want to go into your ref. I don't want to spend too much time in Photoshop, but you do want to get ref, right? And you can see here, the more realistic to the reference that you do, just the better your asset's gonna read. And so I do have ref for labels and stuff on Coke bottles. And you can lock layers too. I accidentally moved that one, so we can lock that one once we're done. There we go. And lastly, for the label, we'll do kind of this Nuka-Cola logo. Bring that over. We'll put it above the name. And we also want to make a mask because we don't want that white information. So what I'm going to do is just do, again, magic wand. These are pretty contrasty, so it's easy enough. If you ever need to, you can play with the tolerance of the magic wand, and that can kind of help you out. But when the greater the contrast, the easier using magic wand tool is. So I will hit this icon again, Control I to invert the mask. And again here, this one we might need to actually clean up a little bit. So let me undo. And let's do the magic wand. And let's do tolerance of 5. Oops, 30. I think 30 is the default Yeah, 30 is the default. I must have switched it for something else because that's clean. All right, now we could invert the selection now too and then do the mask, but it's easy enough for me just to control I on the mask. All right, and so I think I want to move. I just have to be careful because I know this is the center. So really, I think I should have maybe offset my seam. So like, because I think this would be, I'd want the seam to come down right here. Obviously, I'm not going to split that in Photoshop. So I should have shifted the seam a little bit, but we'll make do. Let's just do something like this. Or maybe this is the front one. Yeah, let's do that instead. Have like a side, and this will be like the main one. We could turn on our wireframe. Oops, commit. Let's kind of gauge that. Let's make that logo bigger. I'm just organizing because I can see these couple images weren't in the label. And so I'm just making sure they are. The barcode's not in the label. So I'm just making sure everything is nested correctly. And I want this background to be in there too. Alright, so let's do this logo, Control T. Sometimes Photoshop will hit you up with the center of the image guide, so that should be close. What do I want to do? I see like this outline here. I don't know if it's just because of my zoom, but I'll go into this mask for my logo and clean it up with a black by painting black, right? And I'm not sure. I think aesthetically it might look better without the double logo. But let's get in tighter. Let's get a hard brush, hard round. There we go. You can always go in and reveal, but by using a white. But then you got to be careful because I'm bringing back some of the. This is the tedious part, just kind of cleaning stuff up. X will flip-flop between your primary or your active color swatch and your other one. So when I'm painting mask, I just hit X to swap between the two. And I think because we removed that other logo, we can bring in where is it? We want the name. We can tighten this name up closer, I feel. Okay. Let's go to File. We'll save it. Oh, you know what? Because it's in Maya, it doesn't like me to save over. That's the downside. So what I'm going to do is bring up my material editor. Let's just delete this and see if it lets us save. It might like be stored in memory, so yeah, so we'd have to close Maya and stuff. So I guess for testing, we'll just keep it and then we'll do it at the end. Last thing I could do is like maybe try to add some cool variation because that solid red could be boring. So maybe we just make a new layer on top. Let's get a soft and play with some blending modes. Well, play with the opacity. I don't like that too much. I don't want to go brighter than that. I think I would want to go darker. So let's do black or just a deep red. And we'll just scribble on here. And what we'll do is we will create a white mask and then we'll conceal. There we go. Make sure we have a soft brush. And I'm just gonna delete this because it's distracting. So I'm covering, oops. Can either paint in the mask or just get rid of it, but I'm just going to mask it out. And then switch to a hard brush. Just get it close. Yeah, I like that better. That gradient feels nice. Okay, I think I'm going to call that done. Kind of 40 minutes in. So I'm going to call this one label. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the metal at all. I just want to give it some texture and maybe some text. So look at your reference. Make sure this scale is going to be right. I think we could probably get away with something like, I mean, that's pretty big. It's pretty small on the reference. So what we can do, I don't think this is a perfectly tileable texture. Let's do Control T. Let's duplicate this. Yeah, you really want to try to get like a perfectly tileable brush metal. But if I flip it horizontally, it's going to do a good enough job. So basically, I'm just going to tile this to make like a sheet for me. And so every time I go to the side though, I'll have to Control T and flip it horizontally. Basically, there's like a subtle gradient, and so that's going to be more noticeable than like this mirroring issue. And then once I have these three, I can actually let's do one more just to get full coverage. Control T, flip horizontally. And let's we can merge these if we don't need them. It's destructive though, so really we should probably group them, but I'm just going to merge them. Duplicate, and same for here. Let's get the lighter values in the middle. So let's Control T, flip vertically. line them up. Usually the snapping should work. There we go. So that works out well enough for us, and I'm just going to merge these layers again. We could, let's bring these underneath. So yeah, and since it's just like a repeating texture, so we don't need to, we could cut it up and stuff. I think I'm okay with leaving it like this for the sake of time, but now all of those are picking up the texture. Let's make a new group. We'll call this one metal, and I'll put this in there. I think the last thing I want to do, just so you guys can have another thing to play with in Photoshop, is add some text. So if we look at our reference, that you'll notice oftentimes there's like a label or something that says like it's recyclable. So we could put that in here. I will say this is such high frequency detail. We probably could have like made these UV islands larger in Maya to take up more space and give ourselves a bit more resolution, but the effect should still hold up. So if I want circular text, we can do the ellipse tool, hold shift, and we'll do like this. Just trying to center it. And so what we can do is with the, we'll hide this for now. With that shape selected, we can go to our text tool. And we can click on it. And start typing. Oops. Recycle. And I do want this to be black because I want it to darken up. Just use pure black. And so now I can hide that shape. Now I have that text. So you can do this like if you have a little like a logo or something, like the recycling logo, just make it like a darker value. What I am going to do, I think, is make it a little bit lighter. So it's going to get its detail, because usually this is like either pressed in or pressed out. So you really don't see it in the color. It's like that change in height. And so I don't want this effect to show too much in our base color. So I think this is good enough for the sake of time. I spent longer than I wanted to on this process. I kind of got lost in the sauce. But what I want to do is group all these textures. I can delete this dummy one now. So I have my metal and my label. And I'm going to put this in a group. I'm going to call this group base color. Oops. We'll just do color for sure. So we got our base color. So now what we want to do is save this. So let's just file. We can't save over, so that was a test anyway. So I'll just call this one, I'll call this pop can texturing. And I'll save that as a PDF, and then I'll go ahead and file, save as either a PNG or a JPEG. We'll call this one PopCan base color or diffuser, whatever. So the next thing we want to do is we want to get some height information to kind of get recessed and information that looks like it's protruding outward. So we're going to fake that through a normal map. But humans, we can't really... Some people can paint normal maps, and that's crazy to me. But for our purposes, what we're going to do is we're going to use a bump map as an intermedium, and then port that over and create a normal map for that. Because in a bump map, it's pretty straightforward that white pixels are protruding, 50% gray pixels are doing nothing, and then any pixel that's darker than that 50% gray are going to fake the sinking in. So what we'll do is we'll probably just do like the logo maybe coming out, the name coming out, and then the recycled text. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this base color layer. We'll call this one bump map. And we'll hide the metal for now. So actually the metal's easy, so we'll do that. So we don't need this. Oh, let's hide our base color layer underneath too. So for for our bump map, I just want a fill layer underneath everything in this layer. And I'm going to do 50% gray. So if I double click on my color swatch, brightness, hue, we can set to 0. Oops. Saturation 0. And our value or brightness, we want to be 50%. And so when I flood this with that, that's basically what we want to see. So now in the metal, we don't need this. We definitely don't need this ellipse, so I'll just delete that. And we could darken this up or leave it as is. I think it's fine. But just to make sure it comes through nicely, we can darken it up by making it more like this. And usually for the height, the bump map, I won't just leave this like this. I will duplicate another layer, and I will blur one of them. So I'll do this. I'll go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, convert. We'll just rasterize this one, and so we get some fall off. So it's not like a sharp change like this. We're going to get some blur to it. You can blur a little bit in the process we're going to do. So actually, let's keep this one 100 and then drop the opacity on this one. There we go. It's just going to give it a nice bevel fake. It's really subtle, and you probably won't notice that on there, but I like to think about that kind of thing. Alright, so now, oops, not in the base color. We want to be in the bump. So we're done with the metal, and we want the labels. So all I want, I don't really want this, don't want the barcode. We could have Volt Boy come out, but for the sake of time, I'm going to skip it. We don't need the label. And so the name. So basically, this one is actually pretty close because it's already a brighter value. Maybe it's too prominent. So what we can do is drop the value so it's not as beefy. I'm going to go ahead and collapse these. Actually, let's just duplicate this one. We have to re-enable this and basically do another adjustment layer. You know what? So it's a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. I'm just going to merge these and duplicate. So I'll call this one name. Duplicate. And the same thing, I'm just going to take this, probably the one on the bottom, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And you can, again, play with the opacity with these a bit. Because usually like stamped stuff in metal is like not like rigid. You get like a bevel to it or something. All right, so we got that. The last thing I'm going to do is this logo. So these got bumped. Or no, they're in the group. Okay. Logo, here we go. Basically, this one, I'm going to flood. If I just want this whole thing, you could like go in and have like different parts be different values, right? So like maybe the stars are like a darker value and they recess in, and you know, you could do that however you want. But for the sake of time, which I think would be interesting if you get those different like levels to add depth, but usually for manufacturing, that's probably expensive anyway, and so not very likely. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to add a adjustment layer on top. I'm just going to make it bright. Drop the opacity. Oops, not of the, excuse me, of the logo underneath. I guess what we could do is merge these as well. Duplicate. Filter, Gaussian blur, or blur, Gaussian blur. Do the same amount, and then drop the opacity on the one that's not blurred. Try to get it so it's close. Okay, so nothing too crazy, but we'll see what that normal map's going to do. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. We could do, let's do a PNG again. And I'll call this one PopCan Bump Map. And I will save our Photoshop file so we can always go back and edit it. Again, we duplicated everything so it's non-destructive. We made sure our wireframe is off so that doesn't show up in our textures. So let's go ahead and file, just save the Photoshop file now, so if we need to tweak things, we can. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I need to get a normal map, because a normal map is more standard. Bump maps they're more convincing to you at faking the light because they're using like multiple channels versus just the one grayscale channel. So if I go to normalmaponline.com, that'll bring me here. And so this is a pretty handy tool for creating normal maps. You can do it in Photoshop, but I know they are working on, they're phasing that feature out. And so that's why I kind of like this one. There's also X normals. That's a really, really good one. It's a little bit more involved than this. I'm just trying to keep it simple. But if you're going to do this, you can use X normal for a lot of things, like especially for real-time assets, for like texture baking and stuff like that. So I really recommend looking at X normal, and don't be thrown off by the outdated GUI. It's a really solid software, and they do use it a lot in the industry. But we just want to get a normal map for our bump map. So in my assets, I have my bump map, which is that grayscale map, right? And so I'm going to bring that in. I think I got to go click on it, navigate to my bump map, and that brings it in. And so we can see, let me turn off this rotation. We can see what it's doing. So yeah, that was my fear. I think that's too strong. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go back, but I would probably like make that value less dark. But I am going to tweak some stuff in here because this looks very choppy. So let's kind of see if we can clean that up. So I'm going to turn off displacement. That's actually helps the most. Turn off normal, turn off AO, turn off specular. And now this is just going to let me see nothing because I need to enable normal. There we go. Oh, that actually looks pretty clean. That's still too strong for like a little stamp on that thin piece of metal at the top. We need to smooth some of that out. So let's kind of play with that. Let me zoom in on here. Okay. So we can play with the strength. So right now it's 2. So if I dial the strength to 1, that's not too bad. We can blur it or sharpen it. So I'm just going to increase the strength back up to closer to 2 and maybe blur it a little bit. And that's not looking too bad. I wish I could keep a larger view and edit it. Okay, yeah, we'll work with this. I think that's really all we need to play with. Oh, the level 2 you can play with. So you can play with the level. So that looks pretty good. We're going to notice that effect for sure. Maybe give it a little bit more strength and blur it a little bit more. I'm looking for something that's pretty soft. My fear is, again, this is going to get a little bit lost, but I think we're okay. All right, so once we have that, you can see that's our normal map. So let's kick that out. I'll just hit download, and then it says normal map PNG. So I will bring that over to our asset folder. So it saves in the download, so I'm just going to put it in our base folder. And so really what I have is, let's rename it PopCan normal map. Oops, don't want a plus. And I'm going to take our base color, normal map, bump map, and I'm just going to put this in this texture maps folder. And these are kind of like our working files, so we'll keep those out. All right, so let's jump back into Maya. So pretty easy to do in Maya. So right for my scene, I already have like my light set up. So for those of you who have access to this file, you can go into the channel box and just hit this. And you have your camera set up, your lights, your backdrop, and you're good to go. So I'm going to go into my material editor, my hyper shader, by hitting that icon right there. Brings up this. I'm going to make a completely new material because we're going to use Arnold. So make sure you are using Arnold. So the first thing we want to do is in our render settings, that's this icon right here. Make sure your render you're using is Arnold Renderer. You may have to download Arnold. It should be free, or include it with your Maya. You download it, you install it because it's a plugin, and then it should be there. Also, make sure it's like the plugin's running. So Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. Oh, it's called like something else. It's MTOA. So make sure that's loaded and auto-loaded. Okay. So once Arnold's working, we can go back into our hypershade. You should now see Arnold. And so we want the shader. We want the AI standard surface. So we'll click this one. All right, so if you don't see this, make sure you switch to Arnold for the preview, and then you can kind of see a real-time preview of our material. So you can change the mesh. So we'll keep it shader ball. You can play with the interior spaces as well. So I like the neutral ones just because it don't get the effect of color influencing your material. Let's go ahead. We got our texture map, so let's just bring in our base color. And we will plug that into base. Oops, am I looking at the... Oh, which one do I want? I think we should be good. Oh, I plugged it in the wrong spot. So let's delete this node connection. So I want the out color and I want it in the base color. That's all I did. Okay. Just rotating this so I can kind of see what the Nuka-Cola is going to do. All right. And so make sure my let's close some of that stuff. If you have that interactive preview running, okay, we don't. So this is like kind of using the GPU, so make sure your GPU can handle it. You might need to pause this, make adjustments, and then run it. But usually I can run it in real time. I'm pretty good. All right, so middle mouse button to pan. I'm kind of been in Unreal and it's a little bit different, so I might keep bringing up my marking menu, so apologies, but should be good. All right, so we got our base color in. So in the shader itself, let's make this a metal because its can is typically going to be aluminum. So I'll make that a metal, and instantly that's looking so much better. We could paint a roughness map, but I think for this simple demonstration, we can just play with the roughness and you can see what it's doing. So a value of 1 or closer to white is going to make the material more rough, so it's diffusing the light. And bringing that value closer to 0, it's going to look more polished because the roughness is less until it's none, making for a smooth surface for those reflections. So I want like kind of this brushed metal look, so I do want some roughness for sure. Very rarely do I see pop cans that are like mirror polished like that. So I'll take it to a value of like 0.2 something. And that looks pretty good. The other thing I might play with is the coat color. If you introduce some of that, you can get a cool sheen to it, but then you got to increase the weight. So if I put the weight at 1, you can see it's like introducing this blue coat. And that's really all I'm going to play with. I'm not even going to be too heavy-handed on that. I'm going to be subtle. Okay, so let's see what this is looking like. To assign your material, you select your objects. So remember, we got 3 objects, so I'll shift select those, and then I'll right-click and hold, assign material to viewport selection, and it puts it on our can. The other thing you can do is we should have named this material too, so I'll call it MAT for material pop can. And you can see that's right here as well. So if you lose it on the node graph, you can select your objects and then right click here, assign material to selection. But let's see what this is doing. So if I hit IPR next to our render settings, brings up our interactive preview render. And so yeah, that's looking pretty cool. That looks like a pop can. I have a camera set up, so I'm going to switch the view from perspective to our pop can. And sorry if you can hear my dogs barking. And so you can see what that looks like. So the last thing we want to do is to see our bump map that we created. Oops, I just accidentally docked that right here. There we go. So the normal map's a little bit trickier because it's got to go through a couple of nodes, and we have to mine the color space of the image. So I'm going to drag in my normal map, and under Arnold, I'm just going to highlight here. I'm going to type in normal, or it's under utilities, I believe, and it's somewhere in here. But if you just go to Arnold, you can search for normal and hit AI normal map. We can plug the color out into input and then plug the output into normal camera. And make sure our color space, so if we click on the that image that we brought in, make sure we set the color space to raw. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So we're getting that bump. So again, I think I'm just too heavy-handed with the bump map. I think softening it would help it out a lot more. Let's rotate this can too, or make sure we're in our camera view. Yeah, you can see that bump is doing a good job. You can't really see it at the top. You can see it a little bit at the top right there. But let's go ahead and rotate this. And do this so we can, oops. Let's group these. So we're rotating them together. Let's go this way. And now let's hit IPR. Yeah, I would just dial back the bump map. It's too strong. Maybe blur it a little bit more. Soften the transition because it just looks a little off. But honestly, that's not looking too bad. So hopefully this was a video that's going to help you get into Arnold a little bit more. Like I said, it's pretty helpful to know how to do stuff in Photoshop for sure. Even though it is tricky to, because you're not working on the 3D asset as you texture. So really you want to start looking into Substance Painter or Quixel Mixer for that kind of stuff, or even Marmoset Toolbag now has texturing features. So I would look into that, but I do use Photoshop for like touch-ups and stuff like that, because their photo manipulation stuff is really nice, and you can complement those other software packages with Photoshop for sure. But yeah, if you're limited on your software usage, you know, you can knock something out pretty quick. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.